They made landfall at an island called Bohol. I'm definitely mispronouncing that. The following morning to assess damage. After nearly 2 years of brutal combat with not only island natives, but Mother Nature itself, they were down to 115 soldiers out of the original 277. They didn't even have enough crew to run all three ships, so it was mercifully decided that Concepcion was to be burned down after everything useful was removed. And for the next 6 months, they just sort of meandered about Southeast Asia. They stopped for a while at the island of Butuan, where Pigafetta had been sent ashore following the king, who had intended to show his sign of friendship to these outsiders. Pigafetta had supper with the local king and some chiefs, and then went to sleep. The next morning, Pigafetta, that name's still funny to me after all this time, took a walk around town, seeing the architecture of these Filipinos. And something Mr. Funnyman realized from his tour of the island is that there were oodles of gold on it as well. Most of the utensils, in fact, were made of gold. There were hundreds of different animals on the island, and the king kindly mentioned that the local valleys were overflowing with gold. But regardless, Pigafetta returned to the ships and they left Butuan. It was a stinky place for dirt people after all. From here, they made southwest for several weeks, finding Moorish traders who washed up in a deserted island and which were steadily running low on supplies. To the point that, according to Pigafetta, they considered abandoning the expedition and making their life somewhere on the Southeast Islands. But the stop at Palawan was able to restock their scant food stores. And by the 9th of July, they had reached Borneo, more specifically, I think, Brunei, and seemed to have been well received by the king there, who gave them loads of gifts, and in turn the expedition sent some back as well. I mean, this king received them exceptionally well. Pigafetta and another crew member got an elephant parade down the fucking streets. And when they got to the king's palace, they were told that they weren't allowed to speak to the king, as he laid in a different room whose door was just a piece of cloth. Pigafetta remarks on the king's appearance as a fat 40-year-old man named Raja Siripada, who was served only by the daughters in his city, and had 10 riders around him, noting down everything about him. According to Pigafetta, he also said he only leaves his palace for hunts, and to speak to him, they spoke through a weird tube, like a weird game of telephone. They bowed 3 times and had their little exchange of gifts. Then Pigafetta went to sleep at the governor's palace. On the 29th of July, the crew was feeling paranoid, but they were surrounded by a bunch of junk vessels, and they opened fire on them, killing several men and capturing a captain named Ashe? That was my charger falling. This is the name. Alright, my charger is safe again. Although the progress of the expedition in trying to find a way home, at least, had again come to a screeching halt, as the 2 remaining ships were severely damaged. One was leaking in water, and the other had its hull severely damaged after hitting rocks in an island that at the time was called Bibolon. They found a suitable harbor, however, in the east of Borneo, where they began repairs. But due to the lack of supplies, it took them 42 days, and during that time they hunted boars and crocodiles. Borneo, it's this island, this weird ass thing here. Pigafetta here confuses a leaf for an insect, and after those 42 days go by, the crew leaves harbor again and is back sailing. They robbed a junk ship that was bound for China and got a valuable hostage from Palawan, who they then forced to pay a ransom in oodles of supplies, something like 20 pigs and 150 chickens. And from here, they spent a good few months searching for the Spice Islands, crossing dozens of islets and trading with local natives. They went to a city called Mindanao, where they killed more natives. It's fun, you know. Then, on the 26th of October, they were about to leave the Philippine archipelago as they were rounding the Baturaki Cape on the very south. But a storm prevented them from going further for a bit. But, as usual, once it cleared, they kept going, stopping to get some slaves that would lead them to the Moluccan Islands. And those slaves immediately jumped ship as soon as they got a chance. And finally, on the 8th of November, the expedition reached its fucking goal. They reached the Moluccan Islands, specifically Tidore. The meeting with the local king went well. The monarch was known to the Spaniards as Almanzor, and he welcomed them and declared himself a friend of Spain. And for around a month, this is where the expedition stayed, purchasing ridiculous amount of clothes while selling cloth, grasses, and some knives. Pigafetta here, like he usually does, talks at length about the native ways and customs, and he even talks about news that the crew received about Magellan's old friend who stayed behind in the southeast. Apparently, by this point, he had died. But I need to skip that. I want to go back to banging your mom. And also, most of what Pigafetta talks about here is just really we'd buy and sell things. But the crew figured out a small bit of conundrum that they were about to face. Their departure from Seville was quickly understood by the King of Portugal, who, hating the fact that the expedition was led by a Portuguese national and was going to the Spice Islands, had placed a fleet at the Cape of Good Hope in Magellan's Crossing in Patagonia to apprehend the fleet whenever they'd show up. The Viceroy of India had even been told to deploy 6 warships against Magellan, but given recent tensions with the Turks, by sheer coincidence, he sent 60 warships to destroy an Ottoman fleet. So, on the 15th of December, finally, the return trip begins. But the Trinidad was fucked, so it was delayed again. The ship was taking on dangerous amounts of water, and even with thorough examination, the source of this issue was not found. Even the native king sent experienced divers under the boat, and it didn't work. So, on the 21st, not wanting to waste the good weather that they had, the Victoria set sail from Tidore, while the Trinidad stayed on the island, while up to 250 native carpenters got to work on it. Now, I'll talk about Victoria in a sec, as that is where Pigafetta was, but first I want to talk about the Trinidad's fate. It took around a month or so for the ship to be seaworthy again, but once it did, for reasons I can't even begin to justify, they took the longer, dangerous route eastwards. So, the ship was trying to go east through the Pacific. Maybe they wanted to avoid Portuguese ships in the Indian Ocean? Regardless, cross the Pacific they did. The Trinidad was the flagship of this expedition, as its original commander and captain was Ferdinand Magellan. But by this point, it was Gonzalo Gomez de Espinosa who commanded the ship, and he was the master-at-arms for Magellan's corps. And after 10 days of sailing, they reached the Marianas Island, the island of thieves, where 2 men immediately deserted. Gonzalo wasn't a very good sailor, as his goal was maybe trying to reach the Westeros, and again, his training was as an infantryman. But he kept going, further north than he should, and as expected when crossing the fucking Pacific Ocean, scurvy set in, which killed 30 people, and only a measly 20 crew members were left to pilot the goddamn thing. and their great expedition eastwards failed, and 5 months later they returned to the Spice Islands. At the same time, a fleet of ships commanded by the Portuguese Antonio de Brito under the Portuguese crown had arrived in Tidore, seeking to arrest Magellan. And once they found Gonzalo's ship, they sent an armed party, expecting resistance, of course. They found a ship about to sink, and the crew that was starving, barely enough to sail it. The ship itself, the Trinidad, was taken to the city of Ternate, while the crew was put in jail. The Trinidad was later destroyed in a storm, and from the imprisoned Spaniards, only 4 of them returned to Europe. Gonzalo, at some point, either escaped or was released, as there are records of him back in Spain. And with that, we go back to the Victoria, where Pigafetta was in. And it should be noted that at this point, Juan Sebastiano... What is he, fucking Di Ravello from Just Cause 3? Fuck. Juan Sebastian Elcano is the captain of the Victoria. The ship was sailing fast and hard. The crew no doubt invigorated by the thought that they were sailing back home. It's interesting, during this time, at least the first phase of their return trip, Pigafetta notes down basically the island names they crossed, interesting facts that their native sailors give them about these islands, and what he sees from the boat. This indicates that the crew was in a hurry, stopping only for resources when needed, and they did. They stopped for 15 days at an island to repair the Victoria after a storm had damaged it. And on the 25th of January 1522, they sail again. And now, they are sailing in the open Indian Ocean to avoid being spotted by Portuguese patrols. And then, they reached the Cape of Good Hope. And they stopped for 9 fucking weeks, as wind from the east and the west kept them in place. And they were still in the open sea, by the way, as the Cape was under Portuguese control at this time. And on the 6th of May, they finally crossed this cape, with only rice left for food. And they spent 2 more months sailing up the African coast, losing 21 men to starvation. On the 9th of July, they reached Cape Verde. Hooray! And it's Portuguese! Yikes! They tried to do the same trading here for food as they had nothing left, and it worked. At first, the Portuguese thought they were coming from America, and they even figured out that they were a day behind Europe at this point. That's right, I lied. It ain't the 9th of July, it's the 10th. Then the Victoria had to rush out of the Cape Verde, as one of the crew members they sent ashore blabbed their fat mouth and revealed the truth. They were what remained of Magellan's expedition. So a total of 13 men, all of the people they sent ashore, got arrested while the boat ran away. And finally, on the 6th of September, 1522, the exhausted, nearly dead men saw a coastline in the distance. It was none other than the Bay of Sanlúcar in Spain. Of the original 60 in just the Victoria, only 18 of them arrived, almost all of them sick. They sailed, according to Pigafetta's calculations, over 14,000 leagues. Despite everything, the expedition was a success. They found the Spice Islands. They were able to make trade and make a lot of money from it. And, well, Antonio Pigafetta disembarked in Seville and made his journey to Valladolid. There, he gave the Emperor Charles his diary of what he wrote on the expedition. Then, he wrote to Portugal, delivering to the king a report on what he saw. And from there, he traveled home, stopping in France to offer some gifts to the Queen Mother and Regent, and went home. God, I'm fucking free. And he went home to Venice, delivering the same report to the reader there. I don't know what merchant republics called their appointed heads of state. I don't know. But in the end, Pigafetta died 9 years later, around 40 to 50 years old. This expedition was about colonialism. There's no way to sugarcoat that. Magellan himself tried to establish a Spanish presence in the Philippines before he got his ass killed. And yet, the grandeur of this expedition is something to be admired. These men sailed across the entire globe at a time where such an act was exceptionally dangerous and fatal. And for many of them, it was fatal. From the simple foot soldiers on the crew to captains who thought themselves great, to the commander of the expedition, who had so much in his life go right, he thought to himself, yes, I'll involve myself in local politics I don't understand, and immediately be better, because I am white. And then, well, he got a fatal fucking humbling. It feels to me like discussions about colonialism more often than not boil down to what is wrong about it, which is fair. We were not very nice to people who did not look like us. But this type of discussion hides the real achievements that came from colonialism. It's been said that war is when real technological leaps happen. I believe that's true, but it's also true that leaps happen when the human race has a piece of continent to explore. Advancements in medicine, human rights, it all happened because of colonialism. This expedition that we spent the last weeks talking about did further Spanish colonialist agenda. Yet it also stands as a testament to the sheer ingenuity humanity is capable of. I've said this before, I'll say it again. If Europe hadn't been the one to start colonizing the world, someone else would have. This doesn't invalidate the horrors that we committed, but it doesn't mean the benefits should be dismissed out of hand. This has been one of the most difficult, time-consuming, yet interesting and fun projects I've ever embarked on. In many ways, it solidifies my love of history. At its core, history was never about dates and what happens at specific time periods. It's how people lie for their own glory, and how those lies become accepted truths nowadays. It's how people can be so sure of their own righteousness that they lead people to their deaths, or how a fervent desire to keep your home safe can result in you destroying it yourself. This story was about Magellan's hubris, his growing ego, but it's about the adventure as well, what people discovered, and the interactions that they had along the way. Thanks for watching.